August 18th, 1940, Camp 020, Lachmere House, southwest London, 0147 hours. Rain hammered against the barred windows of the old Victorian estate as Captain Edward Hale stepped into the dim interrogation room, the stale air thick with damp wool and disinfectant, the single overhead bulb flickering just enough to throw warped shadows across the cracked plaster walls. Lachmere House, quietly renamed Camp 020 in MI5's most restricted files, was where Britain held captured Nazi agents, not to jail them, but to study them, break them, and whenever possible, turn them. Its corridors echoed with whispered confessions, coded lies, and the shuffle of prisoners who no longer knew which country they served. Hale dropped a brown folder marked Most Secret XX System onto the steel table between himself and the man slumped in the chair opposite him. The prisoner wore a rain-soaked civilian suit that couldn't quite hide its German cut, his boots still muddy from the Sussex field where he'd landed the previous night with a tangled parachute, a broken transmitter, forged papers, and a cyanide pill taked behind his heel. He'd refused to speak since arrival, eyes sharp but hollow, posture rigid, the kind of man trained to outweight fear. Hale studied him for a moment before speaking. "You were dropped outside Shoreham by sea at 23:10 hours. Your contact failed to appear. Your radio was damaged before you even touched the ground. And after searching your pockets, we found half-burned cipher sheets, Abwehr issue." The man's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. Hale continued, voice calm, almost conversational. "We've caught every agent your side has sent so far, every single one. Some cooperate, some—" He let the silence finish the sentence. The prisoner swallowed. Hale sat back. "We don't want you dead. We want you useful. Your life depends not on what you know, but on how convincingly you can lie to the people who sent you." He slid the broken radio across the table. "We repair this. You transmit, but not to help Germany, to help us. You become what we call a double agent. You tell Berlin exactly what we want them to believe." The man finally spoke, voice rough with exhaustion. "My name is Carl Fischer." A lie. Hale could hear it instantly, but a lie was still a beginning. Fischer leaned forward slightly. "And if I refuse?" Hale didn't blink. "Then the Germans will know within days that you failed. They'll stop trusting every spy they've sent, and you will hang at Wandsworth before the month ends." Fischer stiffened, eyes darting to the dark window as if weighing escape, then back to Hale. Slowly, cautiously, he exhaled. "I will cooperate." Too quickly, too practiced. Something in the eagerness felt wrong. Hale closed the folder, watching the man closely. "Very well, but understand, one mistake in your transmissions and the entire network collapses, and we will know if you're playing both sides." Fischer nodded once, but in the brief flicker of the overhead bulb, Hale caught something in the man's expression he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not defeat, but anticipation. When Hale stood to leave, Fischer spoke again, voice low and unnervingly calm. "Captain, how many of your double agents are actually loyal to you?" Hale froze. The question was precise, deliberate, and far too dangerous for a newly captured spy to ask on his first night. August 19, 1940, Camp 020, Lachmere House, 0526 hours. A gray dawn seeped through the barred windows as Captain Edward Hale stood outside the observation cell, jaw tight, listening to the faint hum of the building's antiquated heating pipes, while the new prisoner, Carl Fischer, if that was even his real name, slept under a wool blanket on the narrow metal cot inside. Camp 020 was quiet at this hour, but never still. Footsteps muffled by linoleum drifted up the hallway. A guard turned a key somewhere deeper in the house. A kettle whistled in the kitchen below. Even in silence, the place breathed. It was a building full of secrets, some German, some British, some never meant to see daylight. Hale thought he understood most of them, but Fisher's final question from the night before still echoed inside his skull. How many of your double agents are actually loyal to you? That wasn't a question a freshly captured spy should ask. It was the question of someone who suspected something, someone who believed the double-cross system had cracks, or worse, that the Germans already knew about it. At 06:02, the door behind Hale creaked open, and Colonel Maurice Buckmaster stepped in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Buckmaster oversaw dozens of covert operations for MI5 and SOE, but he treated Camp 020 like a surgical theater, precise, sterile, controlled. "You kept me up half the night with your message," he muttered, straightening his tie. "This new arrival, Fisher, what makes you think he's different?" Hale pushed the folder toward him. His radio was tampered with before deployment, and his story shifts. He lies too easily, too deliberately, like a man who wants to be caught. Buckmaster scanned the page. "You're suggesting he's a plant, sent here to mislead us?" Hale nodded. "Possibly even instructed to become a double agent." Buckmaster sighed. "Germans are reckless, not omniscient. They don't know about the double-cross program." Hale didn't reply. He wasn't convinced, and the unease in his stomach only deepened when he turned back toward Fisher's cell and saw the man sitting upright, already awake, watching them through the bars with calm, calculating eyes. 2 hours later, the interrogation resumed. The room smelled of stale tea, damp coats, and the faint metallic tang of the overhead lamp that buzzed weakly. Fisher sat with his hands folded neatly, posture relaxed. Too relaxed. "You slept well, better than most in your position." Fisher tilted his head. "I understand my situation. Accepting it makes rest easier." Hale pulled a chair opposite him and sat. "Let's start with your training. Abwehr Section 2, yes?" Fisher offered a thin smile. "You know the answer already." "Tell me anyway." Fisher leaned back. "Hamburg, 6 months. Codes, sabotage, radio discipline, British customs, rail mapping, the usual." "And your mission?" "Industrial sabotage in London, observation, reporting. I was instructed to avoid contact until further orders." Hale watched him closely. The answers were too neat, too polished. "Your radio was broken before you landed." "It must have been damaged." "Don't lie," Hale cut in. "We examined it. The damage was internal, sabotaged." Fisher paused just half a beat, just enough for Hale to notice. "Perhaps the Abwehr feared their networks were compromised," Fisher offered quietly. Hale stared at him. "Were they?" The German looked down at his cuffed hands. "Captain, you already have double agents. Quite a few." Hale's pulse tightened. "How would you know that?" Fisher met his eyes with unsettling steadiness. "Because Berlin told me." For the first time since the prisoner arrived, Hale felt a cold shiver down his spine. "Explain," he said, voice low. Fisher folded his hands slowly atop the table. "Before I was deployed, my handler said London was no longer the fortress of secrets it once pretended to be. He said the British were absorbing agents like sponges, that they turned spies into tools, that the Abwehr suspected some of their own networks were inverted." Fisher leaned forward. "They didn't know how you were doing it, but they knew it was happening." Hale forced himself to keep a neutral expression. Inside, alarm bells clanged. If the Germans had even a vague suspicion of the double-cross system, every operation was at risk, every agent compromised, every lie fragile, and every transmission Fisher made would be scrutinized by the Abwehr with sharp suspicion. Fisher continued, voice soft. "Berlin gave me one final instruction as I boarded the aircraft." Hale held his breath. "What instruction?" Fisher smiled faintly. disturbingly. "Find out if Britain truly controls the agents it claims to turn." Hale's throat grew dry. "You're sent to test us, in part, and the rest," Fisher exhaled, "to see whether your double agents were sending genuine intelligence or cleverly disguised poison." The words sank like lead. If the Nazis had deployed an agent whose mission was to probe the integrity of the double-cross network, it meant the Abwehr wasn't as blind as MI5 hoped. It meant the game had shifted. Hale stood slowly, pacing the edge of the room. "So tell me, what did Berlin say to you about our double agents? Names?" Fisher shook his head. "No names, hints, patterns. They said some reports seemed too convenient, too aligned with British expectations. They suspected fabrications." Hale's jaw clenched. "Some double agents are fabricating, on MI5's orders. They create false bombing reports, false invasion warnings, false troop positions. If the Germans suspected manipulation, the entire system could collapse." Hale turned back to Fisher. "What did they tell you to do once inside Britain?" Fisher hesitated. "Just a moment, but enough. Observe inconsistencies, confirm or deny their suspicions, and if possible," he paused, eyes narrowing, "infiltrate your system from the inside." Hale's stomach twisted. "By offering yourself as a double agent?" "Precisely." Suddenly the room felt colder. Hale realized what Fisher truly was. Not a spy to be broken, but a spy sent as bait, a decoy, a trap, a deliberate insertion to test the double-cross machinery from within. Fisher looked almost sympathetic. "You see, Captain, I was sent because Berlin no longer trusts the flow of information from Britain. They believe you are manipulating it, and they wanted proof." Hale inhaled sharply. "If we use you, they will analyze every word." "Yes. If we don't, they will assume you were compromised." "Also yes." Hale felt the trap closing. Either option placed MI5 at risk. A wrong transmission could expose the double-cross system, but refusing to use Fisher could raise suspicions anyway. Fisher added quietly, "There is something else. Another reason I came." Hale waited. Fisher leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "Someone in Britain is working for Berlin." Hale froze. "You're lying." "No," Fisher said calmly. "Berlin insisted I listen for messages, a signal, a code phrase sent from inside British intelligence itself." Hale stepped closer. "And what is this signal?" Fisher's eyes darkened. "I don't know yet, but they told me I would recognize it when I heard it." Hale stared at the man, a cold realization settling like fog in his chest. The double-cross system wasn't just turning spies, it was being watched, probed from both sides, and somewhere inside Britain's own intelligence network there was a leak, a voice sending coded threads back to Germany. Fisher sat silently, hands folded, expression unreadable. Hale whispered, "What exactly are you, Fisher?" He smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed dead. "A test, Captain. A test you cannot afford to fail." August 21, 1940. Camp 020, Lachmere House, 23:58 hours. A storm hammered across London as Captain Edward Hale strode down the dim basement corridor of Camp 020, the overhead bulbs flickering with each crash of thunder, while the old house groaned under the weight of wind and secrets. The entire building felt tighter tonight, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift. Fisher's revelation had shaken MI5 in a way no captured agent ever had. A German plant sent not merely to spy, but to test Britain's spy-turning machinery, to probe for flaws, to listen for signs of a traitor hidden on the British side, had turned the double-cross program into something far more precarious than Hale had imagined. Now the colonel wanted answers, and Hale was the only one who might extract them in time. Fisher sat at the interrogation table, hands resting calmly atop the polished steel, looking less like a prisoner and more like a patient waiting for a medical examination. The air smelled of cigarette ash and damp clothing. the scent of men who had worked too long without sleep. Hale shut the door behind him and sat opposite, dropping a new folder heavily onto the table. "We've confirmed your radio was sabotaged before deployment," he said, "and your papers were designed to expose you the moment you reached a checkpoint. You weren't meant to succeed, only to be caught." Fisher nodded once, almost respectfully. "Correct. My survival was optional. My capture was essential." Hale leaned in, voice low. "You said someone inside British intelligence is signaling Germany. How?" Fisher inhaled slowly, as if weighing whether to reveal his next thought. "Through phrasing," he said. "Through subtle patterns in British intercept summaries. Through irregularities in troop reports. A signature, a linguistic fingerprint. These messages are embedded in normal communications, so they pass unnoticed by most." Hale felt a chill creep up his spine. "Have you heard it here?" Fisher paused. His silence was answer enough. "Who?" Hale pressed. "Who inside Camp 020 is sending signals?" Fisher gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. "If I knew the name, Captain, Berlin would not have needed to send me." Hale exhaled, anger rising, not at Fisher, but at the terrifying plausibility of what he was saying. Camp 020 was filled with interrogators, analysts, translators, guards. Any one of them could be feeding scraps of coded information back to the enemy. The double-cross system, designed to manipulate German intelligence, might itself be manipulated from the inside. Hale forced himself calm. "What's the signal you're waiting to hear?" Fisher's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Hale. "A phrase spoken in my presence," he whispered. "A phrase only a German informant inside your system would know. When I hear it, I identify them. That was the purpose of my mission." Hale stared at him, heart pounding. "What phrase?" Fisher shook his head. "I won't know until it's said." At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. Hale tensed. Colonel Buckmaster stepped in, expression grave. "We've reviewed the last 2 days of transmissions," Buckmaster said, "and there's something you need to see." He placed a sheet on the table, an intercept summary from last night's broadcast to the RAF, a simple troop movement notice. Hale scanned it once, then again slower. Nothing unusual, until Fisher leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "There, you see it." Hale frowned. Just a standard closing line at the bottom, "Expect silence where noise is expected." A metaphorical warning from the RAF to pilots about fog conditions, or so Hale had assumed. Fisher's expression sharpened. "That sentence," he murmured, "is a signal. Not German, but meant for German ears nonetheless. Someone here is embedding instructions in your own military briefings." Buckmaster stiffened. "That communique went through our internal filter." His voice trailed off, realization dawning. Hale felt the floor tilt beneath him. Someone inside MI5, inside their chain of clearance, was passing messages directly into Allied communications, using official channels as a delivery system. A perfect hiding place. Hale turned sharply to Fisher. "If we use you, we walk blind into a game the enemy started." Fisher nodded. "But if you don't, you tell Berlin your system is vulnerable. That is far more dangerous." Hale rubbed his temples. "Then we send a message," he muttered. "One that sounds loyal to Germany, but tells us something too." Fisher raised an eyebrow. "And what would you tell them?" Hale leaned forward until their faces were inches apart. "That you survived, that you made contact." He paused. "And that you suspect there is a mole in British intelligence." Fisher blinked. "That will make Berlin suspicious." "Good," Hale said. "Let them be suspicious. Suspicion flushes out traitors." Fisher considered this, then slowly nodded. "Very well." He hesitated. "But if you accuse the wrong man—" "I won't," Hale said sharply, "because the mole will react. They always do." Fisher folded his hands again. "Then let us begin." Hale turned toward Buckmaster. "Prep the repaired transmitter. We send at dawn." As the colonel hurried out, Hale lingered by the door, looking back at Fisher through the dim, flickering light. This strange, dangerous man dropped into Britain, not to harm, not to help, but to reveal. The storm outside roared, shaking the window glass. Hale whispered, almost to himself, "We're no longer just running the double-cross system." His eyes darkened. "We're trapped inside it." Fisher's faint smile returned, unsettling, knowing. "Now," he said quietly, "the real game begins."